Hey there guys, this is your host Richard with another marvelous video. X-Men is one such group in the Marvel Universe that's changed with the period, with people joining and leaving the group at different times. But one of the most pivotal parts of the team was the person leading this group of mutants, and even though it's difficult to imagine anyone else apart from Xavier taking that role, there have been times when a variety of leaders have appeared amongst our favourite mutants. Let's look at some of the leaders of the X-Men and other such groups of mutants that have appeared in the Marvel Universe. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Professor X. Charles Xavier has a significant role in Marvel's history as he's behind the formation of the X-Men. After becoming an expert in mutant biology and sociology, Xavier dedicated his life to the dream of peaceful coexistence between mutants and humans. His friendship with Eric Lensher, also known as Magneto, only helped him better understand the tragic lives of mutants when humans continuously discriminate against them. Early in his life, he traveled worldwide to meet the various mutants and understand their lives. He struggled to understand better a possible solution for the peaceful coexistence between the two kinds he wanted. After becoming paraplegic due to an accident while fighting with Lucifer, he converted his ancestral home into an institute named Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, which would become a peaceful sanctuary for the mutants. Here, he'd bring together a team of mutants that we know as the X-Men, and over the years, he'd managed to help many other mutants control their powers and make the best use of them. Can you imagine he was the person who tried to bring Wolverine some peace, considering Logan was used like a weapon whose memory was erased? Even though there was some indifference between the two, Wolverine still respected his efforts and later became a part of the team of mutants. Professor X's recruits would play an essential role in achieving his objective of a peaceful existence between the two species. Even from the ongoing animated series X-Men 97, we know that no one can perfectly replace Xavier. Following his absence, things have gone into absolute chaos, and the X-Men might need him to come back and set things straight again. You know, someone's a great leader when even the most ruthless enemy respects him. Though Magneto was highly motivated to go to any level to fulfill his objective of dominating humans, he'd change his mind only at Xavier's request. Later, Xavier was responsible for the nation of Krakoa, where mutants could roam free without fearing humans going against them. This move was one of the most significant steps toward establishing peace between humans and mutants. His sense of responsibility made him a representative for the mutants in some of the essential groups where superheroes from across the world gathered to take steps toward protecting the world. Mutants may come and mutants may go, but this dude will stay in our minds forever. Magneto. Magneto has one of the most exciting arcs amongst the mutants in Marvel history and is almost like a Shakespearean character. While most mutants had their share of suffering at the hands of other mutants, Max Eisenhardt, otherwise known as Magneto, had a childhood that very much created his persona later in life. He was tortured during his youth at the hands of the Nazi authorities in Auschwitz. The torture only made him stronger over the years, as it made him focus on his ability to control metals to take revenge on the humans. There's an interesting parallel between Magneto and Professor Xavier, as both want to do something for the mutants. However, while Xavier wanted to bring peace between the humans and his kind, Magneto wanted mutants, who were considered the Homo superior, to take over Earth and be the dominant kind. It'd mean that he'd do anything to make the mutants become the dominant gene, be it sacrificing humans and even mutants who get in his way. However, Xavier was the only person who would help him change his ways for a while, since the two had one of the most exciting understandings. This bond was why Magneto eventually changed his ways and joined the X-Men in a leading position, even though he had a history of being their worst enemy. When Xavier fell weak due to an attack from a group of mutant haters, Magneto joined the X-Men to go against the Beyonder. Even though he tried to hide his identity by changing his name to Michael Xavier, he'd eventually face trial for his past crimes. But this very trial would change his fate when an attack from the Fenris would severely injure Xavier. Before being taken away by Lilandra, Xavier made Magneto promise to take over as the head of his institute, and Magneto would comply. However, taking this role would make him face many problems, as the X-Men and the other heroes worldwide would need help accepting him as a hero based on his past. This perspective would lead to many moments where Magneto would leave his position as their leader, but after a while, he'd return to head the school for gifted youngsters. Over the years, he'd question his choice and the promise he made to Xavier, and yet there'd be many times when he would prove Xavier right as the person to lead the new mutants. But we know very well that not every mutant can be Charles Xavier, and this is the very thought that'd make him decide to leave this position and get the blame for being a high-profile mutant terrorist. Yep, that's some badass Dark Knight move from our favorite X-Men villain. The latest arc from X-Men 97 might take the arc of Magneto to a similar situation, because the X-Men are in the most dire state in a long time. Wolverine. Yeah, Wolverine, one of the most dangerous mutants ever, once led the X-Men, and even though it sounded like a crazy idea, it wasn't a wrong choice. Wolverine was among the first mutants to join this team, and his relationship with Xavier would be responsible for getting Wolverine the breakthrough he needed all these years. Even though he disobeyed almost everything that Xavier said, he respected Charles Xavier and his efforts to bring peace between the mutant and humankind. Eventually, Wolverine would grow into a great team player, and this reputation would make him a part of some of the major teams in the Marvel Universe. You'd think Spider-Man or Deadpool are talkative. Give Wolverine a chance and he'll roast you till you cry. If Magneto suffered at the hands of humans, Wolverine became one of their greatest weapons. When they realized that mutants could threaten them and that their powers could be used to protect the world, the Weapon X program was launched. Wolverine was one of the very first candidates for the program and was used for various secret missions. Then he managed to escape the program, but his memories were removed entirely, and he'd have no idea of his past and early life. Xavier invited him to join the X-Men, and even though it was difficult for him to accept the offer, and he had his arguments with the team, over time he became an important member of it. The person with whom he had the most quarrels is the next leader on this list. Wolverine grew fond of these mutants and considered them his family, since he hardly remembered anything about his real family or any other friend other than them. Remember when we discussed the peace haven that Xavier created for the mutants? Krakoa? Wolverine was the very first resident of this island. This very thing led him to take a preeminent leadership role, as he'd be in charge of the X-Force, a team responsible for striking against enemy threats. Even though Beast was the official leader of the team, with the times he'd get a chance to lead them, would prove himself to be one of the best leaders the heroes could have got. Soon, however, differences with Beast would lead him to leaving the group and finally leaving Krakoa. Wolverine's growth was further proven when he became the headmaster, not for Xavier's school, but for the Jean Grey School for higher learning. After a fallout with Cyclops, Wolverine rebuilt the X-Mansion from its ruins and created Jean Grey's rendition of the school, and with other like-minded students, he'd make for a rather interesting take on the plans of Xavier. Even though it didn't last for long with his death, he'd proved to be one of the best teachers and leaders of the group. Over the years, there have been various other situations in which Wolverine has had the opportunity to be a leader, which has been a successful venture time and again. Cyclops. Cyclops reminds us of that one kid who would try to be the teacher's pet, but also make for a great monitor for the class. He eventually ended up in a relationship with the class topper, Jean Grey. It makes sense that he'd lead the team of mutants when the group needed a leader. Even though his superpower might sound quite average, Cyclops has ensured that his personality makes for a significant persona in the mutant revolution. Professor Xavier rescued Summers at the very right time when the kid had first manifested his powers while under the influence of Mr. Sinister. Cyclops appeared as a team leader, even under Professor Xavier's presence, and this behavior ensured that he'd be a future leader for the X-Men. Imagine Cyclops to be a perfect combination of Magneto and Xavier, since he tried to capture Xavier's dreams while keeping with Magneto's ideals. This principle led him to go against other superheroes during significant events in the Marvel Universe. Scott became a lot more responsible after having his child, and the fact that his family was always at stake made him consider that there's a lot of mutant lives in danger in most of the scenarios they have to go through. His guidance would result in the success of many mutants who later became significant players in the group of superheroes. Scott ensured they could achieve their full potential while controlling their mutations. Xavier understood how Cyclops handled these responsibilities and was assigned as the captain commander of Krakoa. Later, Cyclops formed a group here in Krakoa that worked toward protecting the entire world. Even though Cyclops and Wolverine had various arguments, Scott was mainly the mature one, trying to keep things under control. Following the Fall of X events, where we saw the massacre that divided the mutants, things took an exciting turn, with various mutant groups popping up worldwide. Among these groups was the one led by Cyclops, comprising his most trusted allies. This particular arc showed Cyclops' reliance on the ideals of Magneto, as he united even the past enemies of the X-Men to form this group, and they'd show no restraint to protect the mutants across the world. A whole new arc for the X-Men was born here, and for it to be led by Cyclops was the ideal choice, as he could bring all these mutants with their variety of powers together to bring back mutants back from the ashes. Unlike most of the group's other leaders, Cyclops had taken a lot of heat, and it didn't bother him since he knew that the leader was not an absolute person and that he could make mistakes. What was more remarkable was that there were times when he was ready to take the blame if it meant there was good to come. We got a glance at Cyclops' leadership in the ongoing animated series X-Men 97, and it was a perfect fit after the disappearance of Professor Xavier. Even though there have been a lot of troubles in the team recently, considering there was hardly any chance where the team used their principle of working together, the suspicion over Magneto only proved how much he cared for the team of our favorite mutants. Unlike most of the other X-Men, Cyclops is the perfect example of what Charles Xavier wanted his X-Men to be. Storm. Storm is one of the most fantastic mutants among the X-Men, and there's no comparison to her godlike powers that she's used time and again to save the team from dire situations. Like most of the other members of the X-Men, she also had a tragic story that paved the way for her powers to be triggered. Orphaned at a very young age, she made a living as a thief in the streets of Cairo before she managed to get to Kenya, where she'd eventually discover her powers and use them to water the crops of the local villages, becoming a shaman goddess. Xavier would find her and ask her to join the X-Men, and from there on, we'd get to see her and the X-Men in their various adventures. Here, she found a family like most of the other members, but things weren't easy for her, as Storm continued to have her fair share of problems, which included becoming a vampire after Dracula took her under his wing. Another scenario was when she became one of the 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse, but later returned to her senses when the X-Men managed to defeat Apocalypse. These experiences would change how she dealt with her enemies and those around her. However, she continued to show a particular behavior pattern around the other members, that of a sister who would be there to listen and guide them when circumstances asked for it. Even though Cyclops was the team leader when the group was in action, Storm held her own, and there was always something different about her approach to guiding the other X-Men. But she proved herself a leader following Cyclops' departure when she commanded Wolverine to sheathe his claws. He wanted to use them on her, but eventually complied. This sudden turn to leadership wasn't clearly stated in the comic books, but the fans accepted it quickly. Again, this acceptance proved that she was meant to take the team role and fit into it quite naturally. It was quite a move from the people at Marvel, considering not many female characters were allowed to lead a team. Chris Claremont was responsible for making her one of the central figures in the X-Men and giving her an exciting arc. After losing her powers, she got into a romantic relationship with Forge, who helped her regain them. When her powers finally got back, she went to the X-Men and challenged Cyclops for leadership, and she won. Storm had one of the most perfect arcs for someone leading the X-Men. Beast. Beast is a character who's been present in almost every X-Men project over the years. Hank McCoy has been helping Professor Xavier achieve his goal of peace between the mutants and humans since the X-Men were first formed. Even though he looks like a ravenous beast, Hank is also gifted with superhuman intellect, which makes him different from most of the other X-Men. Even though he'd been able to hide his mutant features from people for a long time, he was forced to leave his academics when they were discovered, but Xavier offered him the chance to continue with his academic pursuits while at the same time working on his mutant abilities. Hank hated how he looked after he did further experimentation on himself, but Xavier taught him to value this aspect of himself. If Beast's arc is seen over the years in the comic books, it might seem impossible for him to be a leader. However, his first opportunity as a leader came when he had to work with the Defenders to defeat Ian Fate, but Beast would later reform the Defenders to make them more formal and organized as a band of superheroes. He'd also add a few X-Men like Angel and Iceman, and his team would get government clearance to go through with their missions. Then he got his chance to serve as the leader of the X-Men at a time when the opponent had weakened Xavier. Apart from being the resident genius for the X-Men, Beast would often work as a public representative for the mutants by appearing in various debates on the news and other such events. When the legacy virus hit the mutants and Hank failed to find a solution, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He led a small team of the X-Men to investigate the virus's origin based on information from Sabretooth. Eventually, he managed to find a solution to the virus, which was now targeting humans too with the help of Dr. Moira McTaggart, and he'd eventually saved the world from a plague that could have killed the entire population. Even though one might not expect Beast to lead the X-Men based on his rash decisions and outbursts, the circumstances opened up this opportunity, and he did his part perfectly. But Wolverine would still disagree with this idea. Jean Grey. Even though Jean Grey was given an arc where she'd be someone for whom Cyclops and Wolverine would continue to fight each other, she was capable enough to hold her own. Being one of the most powerful mutants on the team, Jean carried her weight and often acted like a motherly figure to the team. Being a telepath, Professor Charles Xavier mentored her for years. That's how she discovered her powers and managed to control them successfully. Her powers were triggered by a childhood accident where she linked herself with a dying friend, and that had become one of the most traumatic episodes of her life. After joining the X-Men and working with this team for a long time, it was pretty much assumed that she had complete control over her powers. But things would suddenly turn when the Hellfire Club managed to corrupt her and unleash the Dark Phoenix, a potent cosmic entity. This form would take her to a whole new level, and she'd unlock a whole new range of her abilities. But in time, she'd managed to reject the Phoenix and ended up creating a whole new team of the X-Men. Using the X-Men Red Team, Jean intended to bring together like-minded mutants with political power and announced to the world that she wants to improve the lives of both humans and mutants globally. Jean has considered consistently proven that she's a good person at the end of the day and always sees the best in the people around her. This characteristic makes her a leader that the X-Men could use, considering she doesn't allow the mutants to feel like weapons and instead respects her allies in a way that makes them feel valued. In the past, the moves made by the X-Men leaders always feel as if they were more directed towards saving the mutants, which caused fear amongst the humans. However, X-Men Red intends to work to nullify this fear, puts forward an apparent hope for peace between the mutants and the humans. While Xavier did have a similar goal, the way Jean Grey approaches her vision indicates an apparent hope for achieving the goal. As someone who's been with the X-Men almost forever, Jean is an ideal choice for leading the team, and this is something that'd be an interesting plot point for the future of the Marvel Universe.
So long, hairbrain!
Rogue. Rogue is one member of the X-Men who's always feared her powers and full potential, and there's a clear explanation for this fear. Her powers were first triggered when she was kissing a boy for the first time and accidentally put him into a coma. Initially, Rogue joined Mystique's team of the Brotherhood of Evil, but during one such experience, when Rogue came across Ms. Marvel, Rogue went up to Professor Xavier seeking help. Even though she'd worked with the enemies, Rogue proved herself to Xavier by putting herself in danger for her teammates' sake. Even though Rogue wasn't among the first members of the X-Men, she did get a chance to lead the X-Men after Professor X. Following the events at Krakoa, the X-Men were disbanded, and various new teams were formed worldwide to keep the group's original plans alive. While Cyclops formed his team of the X-Men, Rogue put together a team that consisted of Wolverine, Gambit, Jubilee, and even Nightcrawler. In a way, it's the original X-Men, except for Cyclops, since he'd been the face of the mutant group for a while. But this isn't the only time that she's led the X-Men. Along with Iceman, she was called in to lead the team when Kitty Pryde was arrested due to allegations made by an ancient mutant activist. Archangel. Yep, there was a time when Archangel led the X-Men, and even though it might not sound like a famous arc, it did have a good impact on the team's reputation. Warren Worthington III has had an on and off relationship with the X-Men, and this relationship has also turned utterly sour at times. When he joined the X-Men, he went by the name Angel, but followed his turn as the Death Machine, he started calling himself Archangel. Over the years, he played a significant role in many other groups like the Defenders and X-Factor. He was once under the wing of Apocalypse as one of the Four Horsemen, specifically the Horsemen of Death. Eventually, he returned to the X-Men, and during his time there, he helped the team defeat many significant enemies. However, apart from fighting the enemy, Warren also took the X-Men's representation worldwide by addressing the G8 Summit on Human Rights. He made this move during his run as the leader of the X-Men, as it had helped represent the group as a team of heroes instead of a band of outlaws. Banshee, leader of Generation X. Banshee was among the second generation of X-Men members and only joined the group to be taught and led by the original members. A lot of fans might not know that Sean Cassidy was an Interpol agent before the death of his wife, which made him go ahead and join the X-Men and get in control of his superpowers. At a time when most of the people had quit X-Men or were quitting, Banshee joined in and made for an excellent addition to the team. There have been numerous arcs where Banshee was killed but only brought back later to serve some purpose or other plan. Banshee's first attempt at leadership was when he formed the X-Corps, an organization dedicated to using former terrorist mutants to track down and protect other mutants. But this plan failed horribly when Mystique managed to infiltrate in disguise and kill him. The second time he showcased his leadership qualities was when the Phalanx tried to kidnap mutants. Banshee teamed up with Emma Frost and saved some new generation mutants from the Phalanx. Later, he became the headmaster of the Massachusetts branch of the Xavier Institute, along with Emma Frost. This campus would be the one that would house Generation X, and here, he'd help the children and become an essential guide. The team consisted of mutants like Jubilee, Husk, Sync, M. Chamber, and Skin.
Without his helmet, he's mine.
Emma Frost. Emma Frost is a rather complicated character when it comes to mutants. Her loyalties switch so frequently that she can never be trusted. She was mainly dedicated to manipulating the younger mutants and the members of the New Mutants. But there were times when she liked Professor Xavier's work and decided to use her skills for good and teach the young mutants instead of going against them or swaying them to the opposing side. But her past continuously came in the way of her gaining some absolute trust in the mutant community because of her association with the Hellfire Club. As we saw with the last case, she co-headed the Massachusetts branch of Xavier's Institute, and it was there only that Generation X was formed. Later, her interest in training the mutants to form the Hellions led to the scenario where she lost trust amongst her students and other peers. However, one particular event would work towards improving her reputation and giving her leadership status in the mutant community. That'd be when she managed to survive the Genosian genocide by converting her body into indestructible diamond form. Gambit. The latest arc for Gambit in X-Men 97 has been tragic, but maybe there's hope yet for him, as there is a chance that he might be brought back to life. Even though Gambit's always been on the side, he's a significant member of the X-Men and had to take a critical role at various times. Like some of the other major characters of the X-Men, Gambit had a dark past as he was a pickpocket until he was discovered and taken off the streets. Soon, he'd come under Mr. Sinister's influence, who would use him for his benefit. Although there have been times when he's returned to his old ways of stealing, even after being a member of the X-Men, he did get a chance to lead or work as an advisor for various groups. There was a time when he served as the patriarch of the Thieves Guild, but soon he'd work as a leader for one of the two teams of the X-Men. His bond with Rogue always managed to keep his moral compass toward using his powers for good, even though it had also put him in a lot of trouble. It might seem weird that he was a leader for the Thieves Guild, but it was a role that he'd been vying for ever since his first association with the group. Polaris, Magnetrix. The name Magnetrix might feel derived or associated with Magneto, and yeah, she is the daughter of Magneto. Even though her father had a very particular stance regarding mutants and humans, Lorna had her stance and ended up being a part of the X-Men when she was rescued by them once. She'd eventually leave the group and focus on her life by pursuing geophysics. Still, it doesn't make sense for Magneto's daughter to have a safe and ideal life. One thing or the other would always bring her back to the mutant community. Finally, after the events in Krakoa, she'd be returned to the X-Men as a team member. Considering her father had excellent leadership skills and led various groups of mutants over the years, it isn't surprising that some of these skills rubbed off on her. When the government formed the X-Factor group, she'd be selected to lead it, alongside Alex's Havoc, who had a history of unresolved chemistry. But little did she know that she was the government's secret weapon against Magneto, and soon she'd start questioning herself as a part of this team, considering Mystique and Sabretooth were made to join the team too. Cable, leader of New Mutants. Fans of the ongoing X-Men 97 series might have noticed the active presence of Cable in the X-Men activities, and it became pronounced that he'll become a significant part of saving the X-Men from further damage. Cable has a unique association with the X-Men, and the two have been united various times against an enemy, like when Cable came back in time to help prevent certain events that had a strong impact in the future. Even though he was dedicated to working for the betterment of the mutants' future, he eventually decided to devote himself to the betterment of both humans and mutants. Cable's father was the leader of the X-Men and always managed to unite the mutants against a common enemy. Even Cable had an opportunity to do this when he became a leader of the New Mutants. He found that Sam Guthrie would soon become a significant mutant figure known as the High Lords or Externals. He took it upon himself to ensure this ascension for the figure. However, the New Mutants faced some exciting developments under Cable's hands since the group became a much more aggressive form of the X-Force.
Hey guys, check this out!
Jubilee, leader of Generation X. Jubilee is one of the most incredible entries in the X-Men, and even though her representation in the live-action department has been quite meh, she's proven herself time and again in the comic books and the animated series. Over the years, we'd see her realizing the true potential of her powers when it came to defeating the enemy. She was another mutant the X-Men picked up when she was surviving as someone who used to steal from the mall, and she ended up being a close member of the X-Men family. In fact, her bond with Wolverine over the years also worked as a significant guide for her, but her time as someone leading a group of mutants came at a very early age, and around this time, she also proved her worth as someone taking on the leadership position. The one thing that brought her close to the younger mutants was her ability to blend with them, which would be a significant reason why she could bond with Wolverine's daughter, Laura. After leaving the X-Men several times, she'd reunite with them eventually around the time she discovered her adoptive son, Shogo. It was only around this time that she became the field leader of the X-Men when they fought against the Sentinels at the Santa Catalina Islands. During one particular moment on the battlefield, Jubilee showcased her true powers when she felt her son was in danger. Forge, leader of X-Factor. Forge has a history with Storm and will play a significant role in the future of the X-Men 97 animated series. The character's been a substantial part of the US government's practices to maintain security against the mutants. His skills are responsible for giving him the title of the Maker, since he had unparalleled skills in engineering some key weapons. He'd also have a significant role in Professor Xavier's plans for preserving the mutant race in the island of Krakoa. Eventually, he managed to join the X-Men and proved to be a significant addition to the team as someone with a lot to offer. However, his leadership opportunity came when the US government worked on their mutant team. They created their own group of mutants who would be their safeguard and weapon against other mutants and possible enemies under the leadership of Valerie Cooper. Cooper didn't trust the members of the X-Factor, and that's why she hired Forge to lead them when the original team leader, Havoc, went missing in action. Forge would take the team to new levels, eventually breaking their government association and converting them into an underground team. Soon, however, he'd leave the group when certain miscreants managed to infiltrate the group, particularly mutants who had a criminal past. Rachel Summers, leader of Excalibur. Rachel Summers was the daughter of foremost mutant leaders like Cyclops and Jean Grey, and it became apparent that she'd follow in their footsteps eventually. She inherited her mother's psychic powers, which included high-level telepathic and telekinetic abilities. Coming from an alternate future, it was often difficult for her to accept the reality that she was now a part of, but the X-Men managed to make her feel like she was at home amongst them. Rachel had a close, intimate connection with the Phoenix, unlike her mother, and she was very much aware of it. When she found out that most of the X-Men had been killed, Rachel suggested that a group be formed dedicated to keeping Professor Xavier's dreams and goals alive. Consisting of Captain Britain, Nightcrawler, Shadowcat, and Megan Pucano, this group would be called the Excalibur, and Rachel would be the team leader. During her time as the leader of Excalibur, this British group of superheroes would handle several rescue missions and keep up the legacy of X-Men. Eventually, she returned to her timeline, and even there, she dedicated herself to safeguarding the mutants. Synch. Synch has extraordinary powers when it comes to the X-Men, and even though they sound similar to Nightcrawler or Rogue's capabilities, Synch has his own way of using them. He can sync up with any nearby mutant, which allows him to use their powers, which he managed to possess for a brief period. He came to use his powers during a significant crisis faced by the mutants, an attack from the Phalanx, who were dedicated to eliminating the entire next generation of X-Men's mutant heroes. A group of mutants would rescue Synch, and he'd work with them to rescue the others before the Phalanx could go through with their plans. Following these events, he'd be relocated to the Massachusetts branch of Xavier's Institute, where he'd be trained by Emma Frost and Banshee. But things had taken an exciting turn for Synch when the crisis struck the X-Men again, after he'd just been elected as a member of the team. An attack from the Orcus would lead to the death of most of the other members of the X-Men, including Marvel Girl herself. But Synch would soon rise up to take responsibility by becoming the new leader of the X-Men, along with Laura, and the team would consist of many older X-Men members and allies from the likes of Spider-Man to Iron Man himself. This team would plot the counterattack on the anti-mutant organization of the Orcus.
It's about to get totally hot around here!
Kitty Pryde. Kitty Pryde is one such character who's played a significant role in the X-Men group over the years and was among the group's earlier members. Her phasing powers were what we saw being used most prominently, but this wasn't the only power she had, as she'd also be a significant figure during the events of the Days of Future Past arc. Even though Emma Frost had initially approached her for her Hellfire Club, she managed to see through, pun intended, her motives for hurting the X-Men and would go on to join the superhero group instead. She'd become a significant part of this group, as she was the youngest member to join the X-Men and was also treated with the respect that she deserved. Following the Days of Future Past events, a new X-Men team was formed to fight the Sentinels, and this team was led by Kitty Pryde herself. At a time when the Sentinels had killed many of the mutant population, including Storm, Colossus, and Wolverine, including Magneto, Rachel Summers, Laura Kinney, and Bishop. While Magneto took responsibility for the group's mentor, the others acted as replacements for the dead heroes of the X-Men. At the same time, Kitty used her experience with the past group to keep this new rendition of the X-Men together. While it might seem like a crazy arc, the way this story is taken forward ensures that Kitty's team won't be just another version of the X-Men that people would forget easily. Psylock. Braddock. Psylock is a British telepath who's been associated with the X-Men for quite a while, but make no confusion that telepathy is her only power. She can use her psychic abilities to generate knives and blasts that can do much damage. Even though we've seen a lot of telepaths in the X-Men world before, Psylock stands apart and might be amongst the strongest of the mutants. She'd have quite the tragic arc because she went into some of the craziest adventures alone. All these experiences only proved helpful when she eventually joined the X-Men and went against some of the crazy enemies that this team of heroes faced occasionally. Again, this mutant would face a time when she'd have to lead the X-Men when circumstances forced her to, but she'd make a move that would lead to a tragic end. When X-Men faced the loss of Storm being killed and quite a few of the major characters gone missing, she assumed leadership of the X-Men even though some of her teammates didn't particularly like this move from her end, specifically Havoc, who couldn't digest it because of his distrust of her telepathic abilities. She led the rest of the X-Men to the Savage Land based on a call for help from Polaris, but even though she'd predicted a possible attack, she led them right to their deaths. Havoc. The younger brother of Cyclops didn't get the attention that Cyclops did, and this is the reason that he ended up leading a variety of other groups of mutants. After coming to terms with his mutant powers, he'd often clash with his brother. but eventually he joined the X-Men. Unfortunately, this didn't last long, as he'd be easily swayed into joining the X-Factor, a government-funded organization dedicated to safeguarding the US government's interests. During his time as the leader of the group, Havoc showcased his first steps toward being a leader by leading the team under the orders of Valerie Cooper. But again, this position he took didn't last for long, since he ended up leaving the X-Factor, and the responsibility shifted to Forge. Another opportunity to lead a group of mutants would come for him when his mind was transported to another reality where he'd take over his counterpart's body. Upon arriving there, he discovered that he was the leader of a group called Six, which consisted of Madeline Pryor, Iceman, Brute, and even Bloodstorm. He managed to take on the responsibility of leading this team until his consciousness returned to his timeline. Iceman, known initially as Bobby Drake, was one of the earlier members of the X-Men. He discovered his powers at an early age and worked to the full extent under Professor Charles Xavier's mentorship. Bobby ended up being one of the critical members of the X-Men, but during one of his adventures, he was injured, leading to his body becoming a permanent shell of ice. Unlike most other members, Bobby's been entirely honest about his relationship with the X-Men and hasn't backed out even at the worst time when the team faced severe threats. Over the years, the X-Men had come across many individuals responsible for causing hate toward the mutants. One such individual was the presidential candidate Graydon Creed. Iceman and Cannonball infiltrated Creed's political campaign. Things went wrong for Iceman when his father was attacked by thugs when he spoke up against Creed. Not driven by the idea of revenge, Iceman, all cool and calm, decided to work out the rescue of mutants when the anti-mutant Operation Zero Tolerance went into effect. He showed his leadership skills during this brief period, which was enough to show that he had the skills required for the position. Mimic. Calvin Rankin, also known as Mimic, is another mutant who's had the arc of becoming a hero and then a villain, and then switching between the two repeatedly. He went through many battles until he joined different renditions of the X-Men. Finally, he joined the X-Men under the offer from Jean Grey. Even though his motive was always to find a way of having a permanent effect on his power, this never actually came to fruition and would be one of the reasons he wouldn't get along with the other members of the X-Men. He was appointed as the team's deputy leader, and he proved his worth in this position, but Cyclops never really liked him much. Soon, he took on two different enemies, and with the help of his mimicking abilities, he managed to defeat both of them. Give Professor Xavier a chance to make you feel worthy and proud of your powers, he'll do his best. Danny Moonstar. Danny Moonstar, also known as Mirage, is a Native American mutant who can control and create vivid illusions based on her opponent's fear. She joined the X-Men at Xavier's invitation and proved to be a significant member very soon. A specific mythical aspect of her character made her much more graceful than most of the other X-Men. When Xavier formed the New Mutants, Danny was among the best of her peers because she was the only one who could successfully pass the Danger Room test. It won't be much longer before Danny and Cannonball become the leaders of this team of young mutants, and one of their first missions will be to help rescue Kitty Pryde, whom Emma Frost has captured for her Hellfire Club. We got to see her in the New Mutants film, and we saw the toll that her power took on her until she managed to get it under control. Nightcrawler. Kurt Wagner is another one of our favorite mutants because of his extraordinary powers and at the same time his athletic skills, which makes him faster than most of the other X-Men. Even though he's always had his demonic luck, Kurt would have a fun childhood as he worked as a trapeze artist in a carnival. After Xavier took him under his wing, Kurt became a significant part of the X-Men and went on the craziest missions with them. Kurt would be forced to assume leadership of the team when Storm lost her powers and Cyclops left for his own reasons. Even though it didn't last very long, he proved that he could use his ability to make friends with others to lead the group. Following the return of Cyclops and Storm, Kurt stepped away from the leader position so they could sort out the position amongst themselves. Changeling Morph as Professor X. Imagine you can be any X-Men character you want. We're not talking about just any X-Men, but possess the power to shapeshift and wield the powers of any of the X-Men you want. Yep, that's what Kevin Sidney could do. And even though this could be used to do many good things, Kevin preferred the idea of using it for nefarious purposes. This character will be the only entry in the list that might be double-layered, as there was a time when Changeling managed to shapeshift into Professor X by revealing to Charles that he had cancer and didn't have much time left. Xavier allowed him to pose as him and have some of his powers while Xavier worked on an underground project. None of the X-Men knew about this except for Marvel Girl, and it would only be revealed after he died in the battle against Grotesque. Talon, Laura Kinney. Laura Kinney is Wolverine's daughter, even though she was artificially created in a lab using his DNA so that they can have their Wolverine-like assassin. This character has a tragic origin story because she's treated horribly, which makes her the perfect assassin for the organization. But she was rescued by one of the scientists who indicated that she felt like Laura was her daughter. Instead of going to Wolverine for help, Laura decided that Wolverine needed to be killed so that other such mutant weapons could be stopped from being created. But Wolverine managed to calm her down after understanding her situation, and she became a member of the X-Men. As we've already mentioned, she became the leader of the X-Men alongside Synch following the death of Marvel Girl. But Laura would soon face a brutal death when they decided to forcibly recruit the High Evolutionary, and the enemy disintegrated her. Vulcan, the younger brother of Cyclops and Havoc, Gabriel Summers, didn't stray far from his siblings and managed to find his way back to Earth because he was brought up in the Shi'ar throne world. After coming to terms with his powers, he became a pupil of Moira McTaggart, and then Professor Xavier would take him under his wing. But he'd soon again be taken in by aliens of the Vault who would experiment on him and make him a human bomb. He'd return to Earth, unaware he might be a perfectly placed bomb for the aliens. Xavier was able to identify that Vulcan was Cyclops' brother, which made him a member of the team of X-Men. It was secret and included the likes of Petra, Darwin, and Sway. This team was made to save the original X-Men from the island of Krakoa. Since both his brothers had proven their worth as leaders, Vulcan would lead this team, and they successfully managed to save the mutants. He'd also reveal their relationship to Cyclops. But before they could do anything else, this new group of mutants would be killed in the eyes of the other X-Men, even though Darwin had managed to save Vulcan, and the two managed to stay hidden until they thought they were needed. Why does this sound like the plot for Suicide Squad? Marvelous verdict. Wow, that's a crazy variety of leaders, and one can see the parallel it's shared with the rise and fall of the group over the years. However, one thing that we can see here is that Xavier is good at picking his students, as most of them ended up being the best leaders that we could have expected. With the status of the X-Men in absolute chaos in X-Men 97, let's hope they get a leader. They could really use one at a time like this. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks everyone.